The American empire is fading, and we must start paying attention to this shift so that we can avoid a catastrophic decline. The United States is losing ground in the global competition with China, and China has even become a major lender to the U.S. government. Over the past few years, China has been decreasing its holdings of U.S. debt by hundreds of billions of dollars, signaling its concern over the growing debt. Economic growth is happening much faster in the East than in the West. In 2020, the total GDP of the G7 and the BRICS nations was equal, but now the BRICS have surpassed the G7 by about 3 to 4%. This shift represents a major global economic change, reshaping the world as we know it. Capitalism has always faced financial challenges. The way the system operates inherently creates these problems. In the United States, we have a political system where corporations and the wealthy hold significant power despite being a minority. They fund political parties, both Republican and Democrat, and shape the media narrative. Candidates need substantial funding to win elections, and this money overwhelmingly comes from the wealthy and large corporations who in turn avoid paying taxes. These corporations and the rich demand services in return, like military protection, worker education, and large-scale infrastructure projects. Meanwhile, the working class, who also rely on government services like schools and hospitals, are less influential in political funding. They don't have the financial means to contribute significantly to political campaigns, but they do vote, and their votes are crucial. Politicians, then, are caught in a difficult position. They need money to stay in office, but they can't tax the wealthy too heavily, or they risk losing their campaign funding. The solution they've found is borrowing. Instead of raising taxes, they borrow money to fund government programs, which keeps voters happy without increasing their tax burdens. But this borrowing results in a growing national debt. The wealthy and corporations benefit from this system. When the government borrows, it borrows from them, allowing them to avoid taxes while still profiting from government bonds and loans, which are paid back with interest. For the rich and corporations, accumulating debt is perfectly acceptable. However, as debt grows, the risk increases that some lenders may begin to doubt the government's ability to repay it. At that point, there could be a public outcry demanding that the debt be forgiven, or that the government prioritize the welfare of the people over the interests of the wealthy. In the past, China has been one of the major lenders to the U.S. government, but now it's reducing its holdings, a sign that it too is worried about the growing debt. As China's concerns mount, the global balance of power shifts further east. Despite the growing concern, the U.S. still relies on its political and economic power. But the shift in global economics is clear. As more countries, especially in the East, gain economic influence, the dominance of the U.S. is waning. We are witnessing the relocation of the center of capitalist growth from the West to the East, especially in countries like China, India, and Brazil, where wages are lower and markets are growing faster. In much of the West, however, there's been a refusal to acknowledge this shift. Politicians continue to cling to outdated narratives, promising strength and dominance that no longer reflect reality. This denial is deeply ingrained, and only time will reveal the full consequences of this economic decline. Take, for example, the ongoing conflicts and foreign policy issues surrounding Ukraine, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. The West still believes it holds the dominant power, but the reality is that it does not. Looking at GDP comparisons between the US and China or the BRICS countries highlights this shift in power. The economic growth of the East is surpassing that of the West, and this growing gap will continue to reshape the world's economic and political landscape. The US faces challenges that are not being addressed: job shortages, inadequate wages, and growing economic instability. Instead of facing these challenges head-on, the U.S. government uses scapegoats and distractions to shift the blame. The political rhetoric around immigration and trade tariffs is just one way this distraction is playing out, all while the country's real problems continue to fester. The consequences of these misguided policies are already being seen. For instance, tariffs on imports from countries like China and Mexico are leading to higher costs for American consumers. Meanwhile, competitors in other parts of the world are benefiting from lower costs due to the absence of these tariffs. This trade war ultimately harms U.S. consumers and businesses, as it reduces global competitiveness. As the world's economic power shifts to the east, countries like China, India, and Indonesia are growing increasingly important. The BRICS nations, which represent over half the world's population, are pushing for alternatives to the US dollar and other systems controlled by the United States. This is a direct response to the US's weaponization of its economic power, such as freezing Russia's foreign assets during the Ukraine conflict. These countries are moving away from the US financial system to avoid being vulnerable to future economic warfare. The bottom line is that the American empire is in decline, and the US is no longer the economic and political leader it once was. The economic power is shifting east, and many countries are rethinking their alliances and future strategies. The US has yet to come to terms with this shift, and until it does, the world will continue to evolve without it at the center.